Welcome to a moment of meditation. I am Patricia, the assistant chaplain here at the village. Today we have arrived at the last section of Paul's second letter to his spiritual son Timothy. Before we get to the second half of chapter 4, let's review two verses we meditated on last time. Listen as I read for you from verse 6 to 8, in which the Apostle Paul wrote about his impending death as a martyr. For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. We see Paul facing death in his eyes with quiet courage. And Paul looked back in his life with peace and satisfaction, for he had fought the good fight, finished the race, and kept the faith. But above all, he looked forward and upward, knowing that he had won the victory of life. The crown of righteousness will be awarded to him by the Lord, the righteous judge. The next 10 verses are very different from the solemn charge to Timothy and Paul's serious reflection on his impending martyrdom. Listen as I read to you a list of Paul's co-workers and his personal instructions to Timothy. I'm reading from 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 9 to 18. Paul wrote, "Do your best to come to me soon, for Demas, in love with this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Luke alone was with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful for ministry. Tychicus I have sent to Ephesus. When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas, also the books, and above all the parchments. Alexander the coppersmith did me great harm. The Lord will repay him according to his deeds. Beware of him yourself, for he strongly opposed our message. At my first defense, no one came to stand by me, but all deserted me. May it not be charged against them. But the Lord stood by me and strengthened me, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. So I was rescued from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen." Don't you get the feeling that we are reading a communication between close friends, chatting about mutual friends and current events? In verse 9, Paul urged Timothy to do your best to come to me soon. One commentator wrote that this sentence alone proved that this epistle or this letter is in fact authentic, penned by Paul himself. No forger would insert a request so personal after the solemn expressions in the previous section. Even though Paul believed he would be executed soon, he was not sulking. He was not just sitting there waiting to die. Rather, he reached out for comfort from the visit of his friend, and at the same time continued to strengthen and encourage young Timothy. Then Paul lamented the desertion by some of his co-workers and friends. Demas, once his fellow laborer, had forsaken him. Now Demas was mentioned in Paul's letter to the Colossians chapter 4, verse 14. He, along with the physician Luke, were with Paul when he wrote that letter. Paul sent their greetings along with his own. But here, Paul pointed out that Demas had left because he was in love with this present world. Paul was grieving for Demas. Crescens. He was probably a preacher too also. He was gone with Paul's consent to Galatia. And Titus has gone to Dalmatia. This was the Titus to whom Paul had written a letter addressing him as my true child in a common faith. So like Timothy, Titus was another disciple and co-worker of Paul. And then he wrote, only Luke was with Paul. It appeared that the Apostle Paul had some friends still in Rome with whom he was allowed to have some communication, but his chief support was that God was with him. We know that Luke was a physician and a traveling companion with Paul. In Colossians chapter 4, verse 14, Paul wrote, Luke, the beloved physician, greets you. So we know he was with Paul at that time. Luke was also the author of the Gospel according to Luke, as well as the book of the Acts of the Apostles. Then Paul asked Timothy to get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me for ministry. Now this Mark, or John Mark, was a son of a sister of Barnabas, and had been the traveling companion of Barnabas and Paul. Now there was an incident concerning Mark that was recorded in the book of Acts chapter 15. I will read from verse 35 to 40. But Paul and Barnabas remained in Antioch, teaching and preaching the word of the Lord, with many others also. And after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, let us return and visit the brothers in every city where we proclaim the word of the Lord and see how they are. Now Barnabas wanted to take with him John, called Mark. But Paul thought best not to take with them one who had withdrawn from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. And there arose a sharp disagreement, so that they separated from each other. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and departed, having been commended by the brothers to the grace of the Lord. So there was a sharp disagreement between Paul and Barnabas concerning whether this John Mark was fit to be a ministry companion. This disagreement would not be resolved, so they ended up separating, going different ways, with Barnabas taking Mark and Paul taking Silas. As a result, the gospel was spread to more places. So we can see this incident had caused an alienation between Paul and Mark. But this passage proved that had been removed and that Paul was reconciled to him. Now we are in verse 12. Paul mentioned, Tychicus I have sent to Ephesus. So Tychicus was another team member with Paul. In this list of names and relationships, we can make two observations. Number one, even though Paul was imprisoned in Rome, he was able to keep in communication with his team of gospel warriors. He was keenly aware of their activities and even their mindsets, and was actively involved in their lives and ministries. And number two, this list was helpful for readers through the ages to gain a better understanding of the actors in the early churches. Not just the key actors or leaders like Paul and Barnabas, but the various younger team members who were also mentioned in the book of Acts or Paul's other letters. Now we have come to verse 13, where Paul wrote, When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas, also the books, and above all, the parchments. This verse helps to flesh out Paul as a person with concerns about his belongings, his stuff, like we do. It was likely he left Troas when it was summertime, and now he could use the cloak, like a thick garment, to keep him warm in the cold, damp prison cell. The books confirm that Paul was a diligent student who loved to read and treasure a few volumes of good books. As for the parchment, some commentators thought it referred to some less important books. Some believed it could mean letters from friends from the different churches that Paul had planted. Whatever this verse means, it makes Paul more approachable to me, that he was a person just like me or us, who like to read, who need warm clothes, who had stuff that we need to deal with. Now, we will gloss over the next 3 verses, only to note that followers of Christ, especially those in ministry, often encounter enemies. We need to use discernment and be vigilant in guarding the purity of the gospel message and our testimonies. Pay attention to verse 17. But the Lord stood by me and strengthened me, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. So I was rescued from the lion's mouth. Sometimes the attack could be so fierce that Paul felt as if he was almost in the lion's mouth. That happens today as well, when social media can spread information quickly, even instantaneously, whether it is news or fake news or slanderous attacks. But be encouraged that the Lord will stand by us and strengthen us as he did for Paul, especially when our goal is to proclaim the message of Christ's salvation. Now we will arrive at the final verses, Paul's greetings to his friends that he wanted Timothy to convey. We read in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 19 to 22. Greet Prisca and Aquila and the household of Onesiphorus. Erastus remained at Corinth, and I left Trophimus, who was ill, and Miletus. Do your best to come before winter. Eubulus sends greetings to you, as do Pudens and Linus and Claudia and all the brothers. The Lord be with your spirit. Grace be with you. In verse 19, we see Prisca, who was also called Priscilla, and her husband Aquila. They were Paul's earliest friends in Corinth when he was a new Christian. They were fellow tent makers and they were instrumental in mentoring Paul. We have encountered the name Onesiphorus in chapter 1, verses 16 to 18. He was kind to Paul and had visited him in prison and had likely been sending letters to encourage him. But the fact that Paul was sending greetings to his household and not to him makes us think that perhaps he had died. Paul also mentioned Erastus and Trophimus in the different mission fields. Then in verse 21, we see another personal request from Paul. Do your best to come before winter. Perhaps Paul really wanted his cloak before it gets too cold. We now see also the names of Eubulus, Pudens, and Linus, and Claudius. Then Paul added, and all the brothers. So we know there were friends in Rome, most likely brothers in the Roman church, who could visit Paul in prison. And then Paul closed his letter with this blessing. The Lord be with your spirit. Grace be with you. Thus we conclude our meditation of the second letter from the Apostle Paul to his spiritual son, Timothy. We will close with this beloved hymn, Blessed be the tie that binds, which is number 286 in our hymnal. It describes the fellowship that the Apostle Paul shared with Timothy and with the many co-laborers of the gospel. And we know what a blessing it is when we enjoy intimate Christian fellowship of kindred minds. Dan Stokes will now lead us to sing.
Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love, the fellowship of kindred minds is like to that above. Before our Father's throne we pour our ardent prayers, our fears, our hopes, our aims, our want, our comforts, and our cares. When we asunder part, it gives us inward pain, but we shall still be joined in heart and hope to meet again. Amen.
Now receive the benediction from Philippians chapter 1, verses 9 to 11. And it is my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve what is excellent, and so be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. Thanks be to God.